welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of an absolutely gorgeous, funny, bleak, dark book about academic life, about Greek life in particular on a college campus. It is such an illuminating read. It is like a deeply emotional one. And again, it is very funny in the darkest ways. And I am so excited to talk about it. So welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Heather Colley. This is my debut novel. It's called The Gilded Butterfly Effect. And yeah, like you mentioned, it's kind of a literary campus novel that follows two kind of unlikely friends, Stella and Penny, as they get involved in their university's Greek life, so their fraternity and sorority systems. And they also get involved with one another and entangled in one another's lives. And that kind of becomes ultimately their undoing.
It is such an illuminating story, just as somebody who I specifically chose a college that did not have Greek life. I was like, that's not for me. I don't think
Yeah,
I'm going to go to the city where there are no campuses.
yeah.
Which is not to say that there aren't toxic parts of, college life still. So this was like a really absolutely fascinating glimpse into the social hierarchies and the culture of Greek life with almost like an anthropological type analytic gaze. Um, I would love to know a little bit about your background and your research as an academic and how maybe that played into your writing interests and perhaps your approach, maybe.
Sure. So I am getting my PhD now in English literature. I actually research 19th century poetry, which is not necessarily what I would pick up like for fun, but that's what I look at more from an analytical sort of structural lens for my research. But I've studied English literature kind of all the way through my schooling, my bachelor's, master's, and now. And I think it's just very much related to writing fiction. They're interconnected, even if I'm researching 19th century literature, it still is always in your subconscious when you're trying to write fiction, everything that you've read. So they definitely kind of fit in with one another, even though one is much more academic and one is much more creative.
Mhm. Is reading and dissecting a novel sort of like as part of your research? I guess is that like the med students equivalent of like the dissection or the the autopsy?
Yes, but much lower stakes.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly. I look at poems that can be treated as music and vice versa. So I apply sort of musical aesthetics to certain turn of the century poetry. Yeah.
Hmm. That makes a ton of sense, I think, in how lyrical your writing is. It feels like to me as a reader that you spend time thinking about the sound of the words too and the rhythm. Is that true of your process?
Yeah, absolutely. I first and foremost am concerned about style and the kind of prose itself and how it flows and how it sounds and having a distinct voice, which is something that in my own reading and in my studies, I've always admired writers who have distinct voices. Like if you pick up a Vonnegut book, you don't have to look at the title to know that it's a Vonnegut book. Martin Amis, Toni Morrison, you just know they have a specific, almost ineffable. It's often hard to kind of put into concrete terms, but they have a specific voice. And that's always what I'm trying to aspire to as well.
Hmm. Yeah, the way that some film directors, you could look at like a still from their work and be like, oh, that's,
Exactly.
Scorsese or whoever. But yeah.
Exactly. It's the same.
Um,
Yeah.
so this book takes a look, as we mentioned before, at Greek life through the perspectives of these two girls. I'd love to know if you could tell us a little bit more about Stella and Penny and how you shaped their voices.
Stella and Penny are supposed to be sort of mirrors of one another. I am really interested in the doppelganger in literature from the German sort of tradition, and that's how I always envision them. They are almost inversions of one another. What one of them hates in the other, they also secretly hate in themselves. They become really obsessed with one another, but also kind of ultimately dislike one another and have a lot of jealousy and envy there. So they are very connected, they're very symbiotic, and their kind of relationship and how complex it is sort of governs everything that happens to them after they meet.
Those years of like your sort of around turning 20 and like your early 20s, I'm so fascinated by stories about female relationships or friendships that can have that toxic element to them. And I wonder like how much that has to do with like just the age, right? And how unsettled your identity is. And when you don't really know who you are, like you can't really judge a relationship on its own merits, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think the book is very much about being 20 and for a lot of these students being away from home for the first time and experiencing a level of freedom that you might have never had before, which mixed with being 19 and 20 is can be very toxic and debilitating. And I love fiction and anything to do with kind of complex female friendships. And I think it's very real how quickly these sorts of relationships can turn, how quickly they can change, both in fiction and in real life.
Hmm. Especially in the setting that you've chosen of these sorority houses and fraternity houses on college campuses. Um, it is a very intimate and ultimately, I think, feminist look at college life, at Greek life, and it is bleak at times.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
can you talk a little bit about like were there sources that you turned to? There's been a lot of, I imagine, study of Greek life and depictions in pop culture and in media. Were there sources like that that you turned to, or your own college? Not to suggest that you were a part of this, but like your own
Yeah.
memories of being in college.
Yeah, I mean, so I went to Michigan, which is where the book is set, the University of Michigan, and I found the idea of the sorority house really, really fascinating. Like from the outset, I just thought it would be great for fiction because it's so claustrophobic and that can mean people act in very strange ways, bring out people's worst interests. So I always, after going to Michigan, I saw that and just thought that that could be really good. There's a really long campus tradition uh, from Kingsley Amis in the 60s to like Donna Tartt in the 90s that in a lot of ways the book is kind of joining that tradition, or I hope it joins that tradition. And then in terms of it is a very bleak book, but I think that's also the sort of literature that I gravitate toward. I appreciate literature that deals with bleak events or traumas head on because I think sometimes that's how to do it justice rather than through euphemism or implicit kind of storytelling. So that's part of the reason I also take that kind of stylistic strategy.
Absolutely. And it is so tied to the voices of Stella and Penny, because despite the substances that they perhaps imbibe and the anxieties and depressions and mental issues that they're dealing with, they are very clear-eyed witnesses to not only like what they see in front of them, but the choices that they make and why they make them. They are very self-aware and very funny. I did talk about the humor early on. So could you talk about how you use the humor to perhaps underscore the darkness? Because it doesn't like undercut it, right? It doesn't just like make it more dissolved or anything. Like it intensifies it in a way. How do you do that?
Well, I think especially Stella, the way that she thinks is funny. And I think she knows that she's funny. I think she knows that she speaks in kind of a funny, quite, she's very self-aware, almost painfully so. And I think that's part of how she deals with it. And because I wanted to get close inside their brains and accurately represent their thought processes, I thought if she's going to be laughing about this, despite how horrible it is, then I think that there should be some humor interwoven throughout. So, like the way that she views her psychiatrist, she thinks that this woman is like she just thinks she's kind of useless. She doesn't understand this woman at all, except to give her prescriptions. The parents, when they come, also offer another lens into the kind of absurdity, and it's bleak humor, but I sometimes think that that can be one of the most effective ways to get dark ideas across.
Hmm. Yeah, because, rather than the word I was looking for before, diluting the
Mm.
the darkness, it's sort of like it serves the way that humor can serve in a horror movie almost, where it distracts you for a moment and then that kind of lets the darkness hit a little bit harder.
Yeah, exactly. The absurdity along with the kind of reality of what's really going on.
Yeah. And, not only is the humor present throughout the book, but so is laughter itself. There is constantly the sound of laughter. Characters are laughing, they're hearing laughter, but it's not always happy and it means all sorts of different things. So can you talk about how that sort of like, not theme, I guess, is it a leitmotif? I was a history major, not an English major, so I
Yeah,
don't.
yeah, that's, no, that's it's wonderful that to see that picked up on. The title comes from King Lear, which the original quote is, "We will all laugh at gilded butterflies." So that I always had that phrase in my head, which is why I put the sound of laughter in the first scene. And then, yeah, I liked it a lot because it can have all kinds of symbolism, all kinds of implications. So I do have laughter throughout. Yeah, I would describe it as a motif. And a lot of the times it's like miserable laughter, sardonic laughter, or earnest laughter. But I think it's a way that these girls express themselves, whether it's a real expression or a kind of manufactured display of what they're feeling.
Mm. And it can be like a source of connection or of like alienation, and it sort of plays into like the way that these two girls, these two women are like pushing and pulling, against each other, sort of like circling each other as as friends, but there's so much more dark stuff there too. And it's really just a fascinating way that that plays into and reveals things about characters and like what's happening in a scene.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. I was pretty self-conscious about using that as a motif, so it's really nice to see that kind of come through.
Oh, nice. In terms of the two girls, was there one whose voice was easier to access or evoke and one that was more challenging?
I think Stella is was easier because she actually is a little bit she has a bit more complexity to her. Whereas Stella, I think not Stella, Penny can be a bit more one note. Penny kind of comes to the university already very depressed, very anxious, and she's got a kind of clear prerogative. She wants to try to fix this. She wants to try to change her life. And so she is quite bleak all the way through, which can actually be really tiring to write and read, I'm sure. Stella has moments of joy and moments where she feels hope, even, and she tries to better herself. And I think she's just very sporadic, which I find interesting to write because she's just not a mundane sort of person.
Mm. Yeah, and there's a real nice like active passive split between the two of them too, I think. Because I feel like Penny's narrative, like it can be like sort of like subsumed with that like depression that can render like it does to a person, it sort of renders you a little one note and flat, but that really gets you in the headspace of where she is. And both of these voices are so subjective and close, that it sort of mirrors like the claustrophobia of just the general like frat Greek culture.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was really going for with their two voices. They're both extremes, both of the girls, and part of their connection is that I think a lot of people will feel both of these things at some point in their lives or at once, and that they're very interrelated in a lot of ways. The way that these girls feel are just feeding off one another. So I they're kind of extreme versions of different personalities, but I wanted to get across the idea that, if one thing had changed, one of them could have been the other very, very easily.
Absolutely. Oh, so this might, this question might get a little bit into the abstract and questions that are not answerable. But why do you think Greek life persists like this? Like I feel like it's good that we are in an era now where it's beginning to,
Mhm.
be deconstructed a little bit. They're often in the news for for negative attention rather than positive attention these days. But why do you think it remains so popular and so endemic to campus life?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two things that are going on. I think that there's a very real and understandable impulse to join one of these groups when you go away to college. And I think, especially sororities, I don't want to critique the sorority itself. I think that women-centric groups can be really, really helpful, especially for undergraduates as they try to find their way. But it's in their relationships with the fraternities that all of their issues emerge. And I think it's a very, especially when you're that age, it's a very understandable kind of, it makes a lot of sense. That seems like an obvious choice. If you want friends, a social life, you want to fit in somewhere. There's also, I think, there's a fascination with it. And you see this now on TikTok. It's all over TikTok and Alabama's kind of recruitment systems and their sororities get a lot of attention online. And I think that there's always going to be a kind of fascination with what we don't know. Not many people will be able to step inside the sorority house and see what it's actually like. And even if it's grotesque, I think we're curious morbidly.
Mm. Yeah, the exclusivity, yeah, I imagine is a big part of it. The same reason why, like, the Freemasons haven't gone away, or
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Any sort of exclusive, inaccessible thing, whether it's sorority or anything else, it will kind of draw fascination, I think.
And these ones come at such a vulnerable, important age, where you are sort of like figuring out for the first time who you are apart from your family and the systems that you grew up in. So I can kind of understand why like the draw of another system with like a really strong hierarchy and roles where you know what you're supposed to do, why that might be appealing. But gosh, it's just like it also just reminded me of like the college parties that I experienced in like 2002, 2003.
Yeah, yeah. Some of those parties can get really bleak, but yeah, I think they're something that I try to emphasize, and that Stella is aware of, is that like everyone's the same. At one point, she says, "I look like her, she looks like me, and we all look like each other." And I don't think that that's meant to be literal, but she feels a sort of security in this sameness. Like when you blend in with everyone around you, there's a certain, you know, that feels good. If you're exploring who you are, if you're away from home for the first time, that can be something that people seek.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Wow, it's such an interesting book, and I'm so glad that you have shared your time. What is next for you? I mean, I know you're also writing a dissertation probably, but are you writing anything creative as well?
Yes, yeah, it's been wonderful to chat. I have a short story collection coming out in February 2026. That'll also be coming out with an indie press, and one of the stories follows Stella. But you don't have to have read the book. It can be a standalone story as well. But if you have read the book, you'll see that Stella is now going to Washington, D.C. for a summer internship, and that story follows her doing that.
Oh, I can't wait to read that. You started in short fiction, right? This is your long fiction debut, I believe.
Yeah, this is my debut. Yeah.
Hmm. Do you feel like there were advantages that your experience in short stories gave to your novel writing? And on the flip side, were there new challenges that you encountered in full-length work?
Yeah, short stories are much, for me, have always been much, much easier to write. They're way more discreet. There's a beginning, middle, end. You're obviously limited by word count, so it's much less intimidating. You have to kind of resolve it quickly. The book started as a short story, so there's a chapter that's omniscient early on, and it follows Trip and a girl called Loretta, who doesn't really come back up. But it's just the first look at this fraternity house, and that is you could read it as a standalone story and it would make sense. So it emerged as a short story because I've always found that form much easier, probably because it's just way less intimidating to say I'm right 5,000 words and not 80,000. But most of my work comes from the short form.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, I am so excited to read those short stories. And thank you again for sharing your novel with us. This has been lovely.
Thank you so much. It was so nice to meet you.
Thank you. All right, listeners, please check out The Gilded Butterfly Effect. It's available now. Actually, on the day that we record, it came out yesterday, I believe, right? Happy publication.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been out for a day now.
And do you have a favorite bookstore that you like to send people to pick up copies?
Oh, I let's see. When I was in Michigan, I loved Literati bookstore in Ann Arbor. I don't know if there's any Michiganders that might be listening. And then in Terrytown, where I'm from, there's a new little bookshop called Transom, which is really nice.
Oh, that's not too far from here. I have to check that out. So
Yeah, yeah, great little bookshop. It's all just on the main street in Terrytown.
Oh, nice. All right. Thank you, listeners, for listening. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.